أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل لو شاء الله ما تلوته عليكم ولا أدراكم به فقد لبثت فيكم عمرا من قبله أفلا تعقلون. Say, if Allah had so willed, I should not have recited it, the Holy Quran, to you, nor would He have made it known to you. I have indeed lived among you a whole lifetime before this, the prophethood. Will you not then understand? उर्दू में तर्जुमा है, तू कह दे अगर अल्लाह चाहता तो मैं तुम पर इसकी तलावत ना करता और ना वो अल्लाह तुम्हें इस पर मुतले करता। बस मैं इस रसालत से पहले भी तुम्हारे दरमियान एक लंबी उम्र गुजार चुका हूँ, तो क्या तुम अकल नहीं करते? This verse is a very powerful argument for the truth of Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If we extend this principle on judging the truth of any prophet of Allah, this principle holds. You see that the same principle applies to Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam, and this verse is often mentioned by Jamaat to opponents, that how promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam spent his lifestyle in front of people of Punjab and particularly people of Qadian. Then when he claimed to be the promised Messiah, there was opposition. The topic of today's Durs is to study and understand the life of promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam. And I started with this verse, which is very important for us to understand how promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam spent his whole life, what kind of excellent character he had. Then we can present this as an argument for his truth to those who do not believe in him. So I will try for the rules that have been assigned to me on the life of promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam to cover how he lived his life, what he did, and through that we will know that how pious and how beautiful his life was. Now with this brief introduction, I like to start my first part of life of promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam. It is the practice of Allah that He sends His messengers among the noble families. We see that Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was from the tribe of Quraysh, who were one of the most noble families in Mecca. And similarly, in case of Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam, when we study his history and his ancestors, he had such a pure lineage. The family that he came from was a very dignified family, a very noble family. We find in the ahadith that Messiah will be of the Persian descent. We know this famous hadith of Holy Prophet ﷺ, when the ayat of Surah Jummah was revealed. Sahaba asked, among who will that Messiah will be from? And Holy Prophet ﷺ put his hand over shoulder of Hazrat Salman Farsi and said that he would be from Persian descent. When we study the life of ancestors of promised Messiah ﷺ, we find that he was the descendant of Haji Barlas. Haji Barlas was an uncle of Amir Timur, Amir Timur was an emperor of today's Central Asia, the Uzbekistan, the Turkmenistan area of the world. At that time, this area was also called Kirsh. The ancient name of that place was Sogadiana, and the capital was Samarkand. So Sogadiana had origins from Iran. This is according to Encyclopedia Britannica, so that fulfills the prophecy of Holy Prophet ﷺ, or the saying of Holy Prophet ﷺ, that he will be from Persian descent. And when that family moved to India at the time of Mirza Hadi Beg, he was one of the ancestors of Hazrat Masih Maud Islam. Hazrat Hadi Beg Sahib moved from Samarkand area to India when Babur came to India and started the Mughal dynasty in Indian subcontinent. Mirza Beg came with Babur and his army. He was settled in this land. So Mirza Beg was serving in his army, which is about 70 miles from Lahore and northeast of river Beas, which is a small river in North India. So Mirza Beg Sahib, he settled there, and he was one of the noble people in the area. So he was appointed as Qazi, a judge. This is one of the extension, you can call it a mayor or governor also. So he was a pretty esteemed person of that time. A place that he settled there, he named it Islampur. Since he was the Qazi of that area, this area used to be called as Islampur Qazi. And in the Indian Punjabi language, that Islampur Qazi changed to Islampur Qaziyan. Like somebody says, that area is of the Qaziyan. From Qazi, they started just saying Qaziyan. And we all know that word Zuad is also pronounced Duad. And from there, it started being called Qadian. So that's how the name Qadian came from. So the area where Mirza Beg Sahib settled after he came with the Babur who was ruling, they settled in this area, this land that was assigned to him, that was started to be called Qadian. After that, there was a person of the promised Messiah, from the promised Messiah, ﷺ's ancestors, named Mirza Faiz Ahmed. He was appointed as Haft Hazari. A Haft Hazari is someone who was authorized by emperor to keep an army of 7,000 men. Meaning such a big person in that, of that dynasty, of that emperor. So he was a person of high esteem. So after the Mughal dynasty declined, the area of Qadian and surrounding area, which had about 85 villages or so, which was about 60 miles radius, became a quasi-independent. Due to decline of Mughal dynasty, Mirza Gul Muhammad became the leader of this quasi-independent land. He was a very righteous and generous man. He patronized learning, paid stipend to about 500 people. He was a very learned person himself. Hundreds of people ate at his table. So he had langar that he ran. He passed away in 1800s. His son was Mirza Ata Muhammad. So we're talking about the lineage of promised Messiah ﷺ, starting from the first known ancestor and then going down. So in 1800, he passed away, and his son was Mirza Ata Muhammad. This time, Punjab was starting to get under the rule of Sikhs. So many of you may know a famous Sikh named Ranjit Singh. He invaded the area of 85 villages, the area of Qadian and the surroundings, that belonged to Mirza Gul Muhammad's family. It was taken over by Sikh rule. So Mirza Ata Muhammad had to leave with his family from Qadian, so none was left by the family. So they migrated, basically. This land was owned by the ancestors from families onwards, and then finally, when the Sikh ruled that area, they had to migrate. So they left all the land. In 1818, Ranjit Singh allowed Mirza Ghulam Muhammad. So later on in 1818, Ranjit Singh allowed Mirza Ghulam Murtaza. So you can see that later on, the same Ranjit Singh had Mirza Ghulam Murtaza in his army, and he brought Mirza Ghulam Murtaza, who was the son of Mirza Ata Muhammad. When Ata Muhammad passed away, his son wanted to bring his body back to Qadian. So Ranjit Singh allowed that. Then Mirza Ghulam Murtaza also served in the Sikh army. So later on, when Mirza Ghulam Murtaza, son of Mirza Ata Muhammad, when his father passed away, he wanted to come to Qadian, the area which they had migrated, to bury him there. And when he came back, Ranjit Singh ended up taking him into his army. So Mirza Ghulam Murtaza served in the Sikh army and rendered excellent services. And that's actually part of the lineage, that they also served in high capacity of those dynasties in the beginning, and then later on, even in this Sikh army. So there was a lot of military background in the ancestors of Promised Messiah, alayhi salatu wasalam. So because of his services that he offered the army, in 1834-35, which is about the time of the birth of Promised Messiah, alayhi salatu wasalam, Ranjit Singh restored 5 villages to Mirza Ghulam Murtaza, the father of Promised Messiah, alayhi salatu wasalam. So, if all the kids know when her Promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam was born, this is a sign from God that Promised Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam's birth is almost this year, and his father just got land to come back and settle. That Allah had a divine plan all along. So they came back to area of Qadian from 85 villages. Now the family owned about 5 villages. And after Ranjit Singh's death in 1839, Sikhs slowly lost power of that area. They actually had a quite big area from, I was reading, somewhere from Lahore to Peshawar and some of the Indian areas. They had a pretty big rule. And in 1839, when British came, they took over the rule, and Sikh lost power in majority of those areas. So Mirza Ghulam Murtaza, who we know as the father of Hazrat Masih Maud Rasulullah Islam, he was a physician, a poet, and was a very magnanimous towards his enemies. So he was, very noble person. So what happened was that of some of the relatives of Mirza Ghulam Murtaza, his brother Ghulam Mayuddin's sons and his family wanted to restore some of those lands that his ancestors had. So like we talked about that it's 85 villages or so that they had, and they eventually had to leave after Ranjit Singh took over. And then when father of Promised Messiah was coming back to bury his father in area of Qadian, he was taken back by the army of Ranjit Singh, and then he also gave him like 5 villages to live and to rule. And then after he died, the British took over, so they still had that land, but they wanted to take back the family of Promised Messiah, ﷺ, his uncles and his cousins, and that family wanted all the 85 acres or whatever they could get back to their family, to their what belonged to them. So they had to fight. They had to go to court. They had to do a lot of lawsuits. And then Promised Messiah ﷺ himself had to go to court and attend many of these lawsuits, hearings, because his father asked him on his behalf to go and attend some of these hearings on his behalf in the courts. Masjid Aqsa in Qadian, we know, was built by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Murtaza, father of Promised Messiah ﷺ. He had bought that land from a Sikh at an auction price of 70 rupees, which was a handsome amount at that time. Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Murtaza Sahib, he was married to Chirag Bibi. We all know the mother of Promised Messiah ﷺ. Chirag Bibi was a generous, hospitable, cheerful, and good-hearted lady of exemplary piety. One example of her care for the poor was that when some poor person died, she would immediately prepare the coffin, the cloth which is wrapped around the dead person's body before burial, and would send it to that person for that dead person immediately. So she was very caring, especially for the poor and the needy. Chirag Bibi Sahiba, she passed away in 1868. Hazrat Ghulam Murtaza Sahib and Chirag Bibi Sahiba had 5 children. Some of those children passed away in the young age, including the twin sister, Jannat Bibi of Promised Messiah. So Promised Messiah was born as a twin, and his twin sister passed away within days. And another older brother who also passed away, he had an elder sister, and in 1828, 7 years before the birth of Promised Messiah ﷺ, Mirza Ghulam Qadir, elder brother of Promised Messiah ﷺ, was born. Mr. Qadir had served in the British rule in many important offices. After the death of the 2 kids, Promised Messiah's mother had always prayed that Allah Ta'ala give her a child that lived longer. So by the grace of Allah, on February 13th, 1835, on a Friday, Hazrat Masih Maud was born, and he was born as a twin, as I mentioned earlier. So from this narrative, we find that he was the youngest child in his siblings. He had an older sister, he had an older brother who was very involved in the British rule, very well-learned person. He had a twin sister who died within days. He had an elder brother who passed away short after birth also. So he's the youngest of all. So Hazrat Masih Maud as a childhood he had a wonderful childhood. He did not like joining other kids and wasting time, fooling around or misbehaving. So he's been known to be a somewhat lonely. He felt comfortable in loneliness. So one day in his childhood, as Masih Maud was playing in the courtyard, and this person was tending to his goats, and Hazrat Masih Maud asked him to bring something from his house, and the person said, and the person asked Hazrat Masih Maud that I can't go because I am tending to these goats unless you tend for a while and I go get whatever you need. So Hazrat Masih Maud at this time of this incident is very young. He's pretty young. I want to assume somewhere around 10 or maybe younger than that. So a young kid is asking somebody to get something from inside the house, and he says, I can't get it unless you tend to these goats. So he did, and in his writing he says, in symbolism, he felt like he took part in a sunnah of prophets, because many prophets are known to be the shepherds, of taking goats and taking care of goats. So he felt very like he accomplished a sunnah of prophets by this instant at a young age. In another instance, related by one of his companions, companion of Promised Messiah ﷺ, that in a very young age, Promised Messiah would tell his playmate of the same age, which happens to be a girl who later became his wife, that pray for me, that I be granted the grace of Salat, that Allah Ta'ala accept my prayers. So you can imagine at a very young age, again, we're talking about 6, 7, 8 years old child who's playing around, and during this the conversation he's having is asking prayers from his playmate that may pray for me, that may Allah accept my prayers. So this shows that he was very inclined from young age, very young age. So now we'll talk about some of his education. Back in the days, there was no organized school system. So his father hired some tutors to teach him some basic education. And some of his tutors included Fazl Elahi Sahib. He belonged to Hanfi school of jurisprudence. He taught him Holy Quran and elementary Persian books at age 6 and 7. Fazl Ahmad Sahib, he was a Ahle Hadith, and he taught him Arabic grammar at age 10. Gul Ali Shah, a Shia scholar who taught him more Arabic grammar and logic at age 17 to 18. So one thing I also read, that this area of Qadian was a very peaceful area. People used to come to that area and feel comfortable. So even these religions did not really had too much fighting. I mean, they probably did debate and talk about the differences, but they lived in a good environment of Qadian. So this is interesting as far as these teachers been teaching the Promised Messiah ﷺ, and he mentions that in one of his book that he looks at these names of his teachers, for example, Fazl Elahi or Fazl Ahmad, and these names themselves mean blessings, and is a symbol that Allah Ta'ala had provided that education to Hazrat Masih Maud. So he felt, he took proudness of having these teachers, and he felt that Allah Ta'ala had provided him that education through the blessings. Even the names of those teachers was fazl, which means blessings. With this knowledge, sometimes opponents of Ahmadiyyat, they say that the promised Messiah ﷺ was taught by men, and prophets are not. They are taught by God. So how can that be possible? He learned his religion or Islam. He learned about education of Islam through the teachers of different sects of Islam. So how can that be possible? It should be remembered that it is not a principle that everything the Prophet learns or knows is from Allah Ta'ala. A simple argument is, how do they learn to speak, communicate? So they learn from talking and learning from each other. So that kind of is a simple argument. You don't have to, really prove yourself that they will at a young age, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, they're learning that of conversation, talking to each other. So that although Allah Ta'ala blesses the prophets and guides them of learning the material, but not everything is dependent on Allah Ta'ala, even though the blessings are there. So that if that is an argument made, it could be simply argued with that, saying that how did he learn to speak a language? So with that said, it's not obviously true that everything a prophet learns is through Allah Ta'ala, although it is true that Allah guides the prophets. So the point is that the basic education he learned from tutors, but all the spiritual knowledge and the divine knowledge, Allah guided him and gave him wisdom to correct some of the major concepts. And at that time, some of the major concepts included jihad, the Wafat-e-Masih, and which is death of Jesus ﷺ. And he was not an Arab, but he wrote books in Arabic, and then he delivered khutbah ilhamiyah in Arabic. He says that one night 40,000 roots of Arabic was taught to him by God. So it doesn't mean that even though he had tutors in his childhood, Allah Ta'ala did not guide him or taught him. So it is obvious that Allah Mia looked after him, and he helped him, and he guided him, and he taught him. But he also had a basic knowledge from his teachers, from his parents, and from his surroundings. So like we mentioned earlier, that he preferred seclusion. He did not prefer crowds. He had been known to spend a lot of time in mosque. He was fond of his father's library from childhood. He spent a lot of time in the mosque. He studied Holy Quran while pacing himself in the mosque. He mentioned that he liked the life of seclusion and said, alone in company and single in a crowd. So he very much so preferred seclusion. He very much so was more involved in finding Allah Ta'ala and having a relationship with Allah Ta'ala than his surroundings and people who were around him. So he preferred knowledge, and he preferred having a better relationship with Allah Ta'ala. As far as his activities of exercise and sports, Promised Messiah ﷺ did not inculcate himself in too much sports. However, he maintained his exercise and preferred walking long distances. It is mentioned that he walked fast. He learned to swim in childhood. Later, he also learned to ride horse, which he was very good at. So he maintained his exercise. He walked. It is mentioned he walked. He liked walking and जिसे कहते हैं सैर करना. He preferred doing सैर. And in many times it's also said that he would walk to mosque, and during that time he would repeatedly read Quran, and he read Quran of hundreds of times during these walks. So he definitely liked to walk a lot, and even during these walks, he did not waste his time and learned the Holy Quran and tried to take benefit of this book of Allah Mia. Promised Messiah, Islam, his first marriage was with Hurmat Bibi at the age of 16. She was his mamu's daughter, a maternal uncle's daughter. This marriage was arranged by his father at a young age of 16. In an instance, it is mentioned that when people would come to meet the father of Promised Messiah, ﷺ, they would wonder and ask about Promised Messiah, ﷺ, to where Ahmad is, where Ahmad ﷺ is, and has not been seen for a while. So people did not usually see him playing around, walking around at age of, even after marriage. He was secluded and continued his worship. So people would come and visit his home, to his father's home, and they would wonder where this child is. They see his elder brother, Mirza Qadir, but they don't see him often. So they would ask his father, where is he? And in response, his father would say or said that my child is a masitar, or this child is a masitar. Neither he works, neither earns any income. So you can tell from this that he was, and masitar, if you don't know what that means, masitar is in Punjabi, refers to somebody who spends a lot of time in mosque, and he spends a lot of time in Holy Quran study. So that's what you refer to a person who's always in the remembrance of Allah Ta'ala, a masitar, who's always spent his time in Masjid. So his father would say that he's a masitar, and he doesn't work or earn any income, and I'm guessing this time is when after marriage. So his father expects him to work and earn his own income, but he's so into worship of Allah and study of Holy Quran that he did not really have any care for worldly matters. And to prove that, he was definitely, a holy person, a very noble person, a very wise person. And it was evident from the young age. And through this marriage with Hurmat Bibi, Promised Messiah ﷺ had two sons, Mirza Sultan Ahmad Sahib and Mirza Fazl Ahmad Sahib. Mirza Fazl Ahmad Sahib did not accept Ahmadiyyat. He passed away early on in 1904 during the lifetime of Promised Messiah ﷺ, whereas Mirza Sultan Ahmad Sahib later became Ahmadi by doing bai'at on hand of his younger brother, Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad Khalifatul Masih II. Mirza Aziz Ahmad, the eldest son of Mirza Sultan Ahmad Sahib, actually was Sahabi and accepted Ahmadiyyat at the hand of Promised Messiah ﷺ. So we mentioned that, when they came back, Mirza Murtaza Sahib, his father, when they returned and they had 5 villages, and their ancestors had about 85 villages. So there was a lot of disputes, lawsuits, that they were trying to get the land back. Their family was trying to get the land back. So it's mentioned that promised Messiah was also heavily involved in attending these hearings, court hearings for these lands. And he had to travel from Lahore to Lahore and Dilhousie. So he had to travel from Qadian to Lahore and Dilhousie for different hearings. And he was, even though he didn't like being part of these hearings, and he didn't really want those lands back personally, but he just did it in the obedience of his dad, who asked him to go and attend these hearings. And so he was totally disconnected because of this. Of course, he would go, but he wasn't really connected to it. He didn't really wanted to do anything, and he would just attend it just because his father told him so. And then his father would get worried that, this person, he doesn't really have any worldly focus. He doesn't know how to get money, how is he going to live his life. So he started to get worried about him. And so in this effort, he got him a job. It was a government post in a Sialkot court as a reader in 1863. So as a worry from his father, he didn't see him doing much with his business life, with his worldly life. So he helped him get a job in a Sialkot Sialkot court as a reader in 1863. So for this job, he stayed there in Sialkot for 5 years doing this job. During this time, it was very important for him to experience the word firsthand. And he made a lot of connections with people of different faiths, like Christians and Hindus, because he's out of his comfort area. So he's, facing the people in the real world. So he took a lot of good experiences from that. He got a good perspective of life from this business world, from this worldly things. So for example, he took elementary English classes at that court that was offered. He took part in various debates during his time in Sialkot. He was very interested in these intellectual discussions with Christians or the Hindus on the concept of Trinity, concept of salvation, atonement, and some other kind of topics that he always liked to debate and talk about differences and with people of different faiths. And he did that especially during the Sialkot time when he met all these people. Hazur did appear also in the law exam called Mukhtar. However, he did not pass this exam. Later on, Punjab University was getting established, and somebody asked him to become a teacher at the university, but he declined the offer. He did not want to do it. Again and again, he just didn't feel attached to the worldly matters. He was always attached to, worship and remembrance of Allah Mia and Holy Quran. So with this pay, while in Sialkot during these 5 years, he of course earned money, and with his pay, he used to help the poor and needy, so much so that his father had to send him money so he can take care of his own expenses. So whatever income he would get, just like his mother, he was very affectionate to the poor and needy. So he would spend out of his pocket for those people, and then he will fall short in his own expenses. Then his father would send him money so he can pay for his own expenses. One time a family barber, visited him from Qadian, where his mother sent him 4 dresses. He told him that this life in Sialkot is like jail. He gave one of his suits to his barber. So one of his family person from Qadian, his mother sent him 4 dresses. So this family barber brought him to Sialkot, and during that discussion, he mentioned that he didn't like the life of Sialkot. He thought it was like a jail. So he returned to Qadian in 1968 because his father needed him for some family matters. He devoted his time to reading the Holy Quran, books of Ahadith, and read them repeatedly. He also subscribed to local newspaper to be aware of others' beliefs and how other beliefs and know what others object about. He even started writing for articles for these newspapers. He started writing articles for these newspapers and debates in the newspapers. Some of famous ones includes, so some of the famous newspapers and magazines were Safir of Amritsar, Hindu Bandhu, Mansoor Muhammadi, and Mansoor Muhammadi that's where he published the announcement of Barheen Ahmadiyya. He was involved in poetry. He wrote Persian poetry earlier on before his ministry. If you remember, we talked about he learned Persian from a teacher at the age of 6 or 7. So he was very involved in poetry, and he wrote his first Persian poetry at an early age. It is known as, so that Persian poetry is known as Durr-e Makhnoon, hidden pearl. It was published after his demise. His takhallus or pen name was Farooq. He also visited some holy men. He would request them for prayers, and he would ask for prayers for the victory of Islam. He was worried about so in Qadian there was a religion, Arya Samaj, a Hindu religion, and the Christianity who were dominating in that area. So he was worried about the status of Islam, and he would visit some of these holy, noble people, and he would ask them for prayers for the victory of Islam, for the truth of Islam. So he was very pained by that. And one of those noble people, name is Maulvi Abdullah Ghazni from Amritsar and Sharaf Deen near Talapur, who he would request for the prayers for the safeguard of Islam and the victory of Islam. One incident around 1869, when he was about 34 years old, he's becoming known to the public, especially people in Qadian. So Muhammad Hussain Batalvi, an Ahle Hadith who was from Batala, he had done his Maulvi Fazl exam and had returned to Batala and was being opposed at the time by other Muslim sects. So one of the people in Qadian assisted Promised Messiah ﷺ to go and debate with Mr. Batalvi. And Promised Messiah ﷺ, after so much insistence, he went there for the debate. Hazur questioned Mr. Batalvi about his beliefs on a certain theological point and did not really find anything objectionable to his response to this question. So Hazur just came back, just didn't felt like there's a need for a debate, so he came back. And the person who had brought Hazrat Masih Maud for this discussion was furious. He expressed his consternation in harsh words for this letdown. So he was feeling let down, like we brought Promised Messiah to have this debate with this guy who's been to school of special education on Islam, and he's already debating with a lot of people around a lot of different sects, and he's well known, and we wanted to make Promised Messiah to be superior in this debate, and Promised Messiah just went, and he didn't feel like there was a need of debate. Whatever he said, he kind of agreed with him, and he said, okay, that's fine, and he walked away. So this person who brought him, he was very furious. But of course, Promised Messiah ﷺ, listened to him, and he maintained himself and then whatever. And he maintained and he said, whatever I did was to seek the pleasure of God Almighty. I don't care if anyone condemns it. God Almighty was so pleased with his attitude, and he was comforted with the following revelation in Urdu. Your God is pleased with your attitude. He will shower his blessings on you, so much so that kings would seek blessings from your garments. And this was the first revelation at the age of 34. Hazrat Masih Maud writes that thereafter in a vision I was also shown those kings. They were riding upon horses. This is evident that Hazrat Masih Maud at a very young age had a connection with Allah Ta'ala. So at 34 years old, he had this first revelation from God. So he was learning this religion not to show people, not to bring people down, but to bring Islam up. To bring, he didn't have any intention to show himself as a superior, but to show Islam as a superior and the religion of peace, and with the religion of all the answers. So we are very short of time. There was a Hindu, this is probably the last incident we'll talk about, and then we'll end here and then continue in my next Durs. There was a Hindu Shrampat Rai, Hindu person, his name is Shrampat Rai. He was the secretary of Arya Samaj in Qadian. So there's an organization in Qadian, Arya Samaj, and he was the secretary of that organization, of that community. He did not believe in the prophecies of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he would always argue with Promised Messiah alaihi wasallam, and he would say that he didn't believe that they ever came true. So one day, Shrampat Rai's brother and his friend got into jail over some dispute, and Shrampat Rai came to Hazur to request for prayers for his brother. So Shrampat Rai is against. He doesn't believe in the prophecies of Holy Prophet ﷺ, and he goes to the Promised Messiah and he says, hey, I don't believe him, so you're Muslim or you believe in Prophet Muhammad. So he's saying those bad things. But when his brother goes to jail, he comes to Promised Messiah ﷺ, and he asks for prayers about his brothers. And he told him that his brother has gone into jail along with his friend over some dispute, and please pray for my brother. And this is, so in another word, this is also a proof that where in the verse I recited, I have indeed lived among you a whole lifetime before this. So from just the noble lifestyle of Promised Messiah, people felt like he was a holy person, he was a noble, he was a person that they could come and ask for prayers. So even though, in addition to not just asking for prayer, but he wanted to challenge Promised Messiah ﷺ. So he went ahead and asked Promised Messiah that I will believe in the prophecies of Holy Prophet ﷺ, that they came true if you foretell me what's going to happen to my brother. Well, what's his sentence is going to be. So Promised Messiah prayed and told him that this case is in the chief court, it's in the higher court. It will get sent down to the lower court, and Shrampat's brother will be reduced to half the sentence. And the other person who's also in jail with the Shrampat's brother, his sentence will remain the same. And we'll start from this story when we come back for the next Durs, inshallah. So, Jazakallah, Jaza, wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.